Hey there. Come a little closer to the fire with me. Tonight I want to tell you a love story that people often paint in bright colors, like ribbons and white lace. But underneath, there is a darker truth, quieter than any scandal, and heavier than any crown. It begins with a girl who was never allowed to be alone, not for one single breath. A palace that felt like a locked box, and a boy brought in like a chess piece. From a small German duchy some people called irrelevant, it begins with a diary page that would outlive them both. With a smile noticed in candlelight, and with a long shadow none of them could see yet. The shadow of 40 years, dressed in black. If you enjoy stories like this, real human stories told softly in the dark, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It helps this little corner of night keep going. And if you feel like it, leave a comment about where you are listening from and what time it is there. I always find it strangely comforting to picture you out there, somewhere, breathing with me. Now, let the room dim. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your jaw unclench, just a touch. Feel the warmth of the fireplace moving across your face, even if only in imagination. If you were standing here with me, I would pull an old chair closer to the hearth and let the silence settle between our words. Breathe in and out. And while you breathe, we will step back to April of 1836, Kensington Palace, London. Picture corridors and closed doors, not the glitter of portraits. The floors carry sound. A footstep does not disappear. It travels. It echoes. It tells on you. Candle smoke clings to the curtains. Dust rests on the edges of furniture like a quiet snowfall that never melts. In one of those rooms, a girl is turning 17. Her name is Alexandrina Victoria, though people will soon shorten it, as if trimming her down makes her easier to handle. For now, she is simply Victoria. Small, stubborn, bright-eyed, and watched. Always watched. Her childhood is shaped by something called the Kensington System. That name sounds tidy, almost gentle. The lived truth is not. She is rarely alone. She cannot even walk down a staircase without someone holding her hand. Even sleep is supervised. Even dreams are borrowed, because she sleeps in her mother's room, pressed into someone else's rhythm. Honestly, I have always found it strange how control can disguise itself as care. You know that feeling when someone says, I only want what's best for you, and yet your chest feels tighter. Victoria lives inside that feeling. But tonight, there is a ball. The palace changes its face. Candles are lit until the air becomes soft with flame. The smell of hot wax rises. Music gathers itself. Fabric brushes fabric. Shoes glide and catch. The room fills with the low, restless sound of people being careful. And Victoria, the girl who has been held close her whole life, is dressed for an evening where everyone will look at her. Among the guests are three people who will change the shape of her life. Her uncle Leopold is there, now King of Belgium, a man with plans, folded neatly inside his manners, and with him come two young princes, his nephews Ernest and Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Many in England consider Albert's home insignificant, a small patchwork of territory across the Channel. Yet the meeting is not an accident. Victoria's mother and Albert's father are siblings, and Leopold has been patient enough to believe he can guide history by guiding a family. But the teenagers are not given the whole map. They are simply told to meet, to dance, to be polite. And that is where the story becomes almost painfully human. Victoria comes down the stairs and sees Albert, and for one small moment, the machinery of politics softens into something like ordinary attention. She does not see a treaty. She sees a boy her own age. Later, she will write in her diary that he is extremely handsome. Large blue eyes, a beautiful nose, a sweet mouth with fine teeth. It is such a teenage detail, so simple it nearly makes you smile. A future queen gushing privately about a boy's smile, like any girl would, if her life were allowed to be normal. Albert is courteous, trained in restraint. His own notes are more reserved, and yet he keeps feeling faint. The English court is louder and later than what he is used to. The rooms are warm, with bodies in candlelight, and he is holding himself upright through introductions and dances, as if the night is an exam that will not end. There is something tender about that, isn't there? The boy who will become a symbol of steady duty, already struggling to stay awake at a party. Victoria dances with him more than once. She later calls one dance very merry. For a girl raised in isolation, the simple act of moving her feet in time with music must feel like tasting air after years in a sealed room. Listen closely, and you can hear it, the faint scrape of shoes, the soft swish of fabric, the way laughter rises and quickly learns to behave again. But the truth is, nobody in that room knows what this moment will become. Victoria is not ready for marriage. She is 17. She enjoys the visit, and after Ernest and Albert leave, she writes warmly to Leopold, but makes her position clear. Not now. Not soon. Marriage feels like another lock. Albert returns to Germany. He goes back to study, to law and philosophy and political economy. His world smells of ink and old paper. Victoria remains in Kensington, in the system that shaped her body and her mind. If you pause here with me, you can feel how delicate the thread is. A first meeting, a dance, a diary line, and yet it is enough. Because here is the darker truth I promised you. Sometimes the moment that changes your life does not announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it arrives softly, like a letter slid under a door. And you do not understand what it contains until years later, when the ink has already dried into fate. 1 year passes. On June 20th, Chen Babai Sanshiji. Everything changes in the quietest way possible. Not with trumpets. With a knock before sunrise. A sound that seems too loud in a sleeping house. Victoria is still sleeping in her mother's room. Even at 18, even as heir to the throne, she has not been allowed the privacy of her own night. Her mother wakes her. The Archbishop of Canterbury is downstairs. Lord Cunningham is there too. Urgent. Formal. The kind of urgency that makes the air feel thinner. Victoria pulls on a dressing gown. The fabric is cool. Her bare feet touch the floor, and she feels the chill climb up her legs like water. She walks to her sitting room. Alone. For the first time in her life, she steps into a room without someone holding her hand. And then she hears it. King William IV is dead. And so, she is queen. Her journal will record it with plainness that almost hurts. I am queen. No decoration. A girl's handwriting trying to fit an empire into a line. She asks for 1 hour alone. 1 hour. Imagine how desperate you must be for solitude that you ask for it the moment you become the most watched woman in the country. She closes the door. The room holds its breath. Outside, life is waiting to rush in. Ministers and papers and expectations. But for 1 hour, she has quiet. Maybe she stands by a window and the morning light looks the same as it always has, which is almost insulting. The world has not changed, and yet her entire life has. When the hour ends, it is over. Duty begins. Within weeks, she leaves Kensington Palace and moves to Buckingham Palace. It is not just a change of address. It is a declaration. I will not be managed like a child anymore. Buckingham is not yet the polished symbol it will become. There are drafts. There are rooms that smell faintly of damp. But it is hers. The public falls in love with the idea of her. On Coronation Day, crowds press into the streets just to see their young queen pass by. Imagine the sound, thousands of voices layered together, like wind in a forest. Imagine the smell of horses and street mud and summer air. Victoria writes about their loyalty with surprise, almost gratitude. And then the loneliness arrives. Because freedom is not the same as companionship. The crown gives Victoria power. And it builds a wall around her. Every conversation becomes formal. Every smile is measured. Everyone wants something. Even kindness can feel like a hook. Soon, the question circles her like a quiet bird. When will she marry? Her answer is sharp. Not anytime soon. She has tasted independence and she does not want to hand it back. Under the customs of her day, husbands have authority. Even a queen must live inside the expectation that a man will be master in the house. After being controlled for 18 years, the idea of stepping willingly into a new kind of control feels like suffocation. There are princes offered up like tidy solutions. She meets the Orange Princes from the Netherlands and is unimpressed. bluntly so. It is almost funny. And yet behind that bluntness is a serious hunger. She refuses to let marriage be only a political tool. She wants to choose. She wants, privately, to actually like the man she must live beside. Time passes. Victoria rolls, learns, grows sharper. The loneliness stays. An ache she does not show easily. At night, after ministers and paperwork, after the noise of court, she returns to rooms that are hers, finally hers, and discovers how cold solitude can be. And somewhere, in the background, a memory stays warm. A boy's smile in candlelight, blue eyes, a sweet mouth, a tired prince trying not to faint at a late English party. Albert. 3 years have passed since that first meeting. For Victoria, 3 years of becoming sovereign. For Albert, 3 years of study and travel, of growing into his discipline. And Leopold. Patient Leopold keeps writing, gently, persistently, suggesting another visit. Victoria delays. Too busy, she tells herself. Not ready. Only family courtesy. But by 1839, pressure has thickened around her. The need for an heir, the gossip, the political anxiety. The walls of protocol feel closer. The air feels shorter. So she agrees. October 1839. Windsor Castle. Windsor is old stone and history. Drafts that carry the smell of wet earth. High ceilings that make voices smaller. At dusk, the castle seems to swallow light and hold it. Victoria stands at a window. Her fingers rest on the sill. The glass is cool. Somewhere below, horses stamp. Leather creaks. A carriage is expected. She tells herself she is calm. She is the queen. She has met princes before. She has refused them before. This is only a visit. Only courtesy. Only family. And yet her heart does a small, private thing. A quick beat. A memory rising like warmth. The gates will open. Wheels will roll in. And when Albert steps down from that carriage, Victoria will discover that time does not just pass. It transforms. So stay with me, softly, into the next moment. The waiting stretches. She can hear the distant scrape of a wheel somewhere beyond the courtyard. Then a pause. Then the muffled call of a guard. A gust of air slips through a gap in the window frame and touches her knuckles. It smells of cold grass and horses, and something metallic, like damp iron. The castle behind her murmurs, with tiny sounds, a candle wick ticking, the faint whisper of a curtain moving, the smallest creak of wood as the building settles into night. Victoria tells herself she is only being polite, only doing what is expected, only letting her cousins visit. But the body does not always obey the mind. Her stomach tightens. then loosens. Her breath becomes shallow, and she has to consciously slow it, the way you might smooth a bed sheet so it lies flat again. You know that feeling when you are about to open a letter and you are not sure whether it contains comfort or trouble? That is the shape of this moment. A letter made of footsteps, a message made of a carriage. Somewhere in the courtyard, lantern light swings. It paints moving circles on the stone, pale gold on gray. Shadows stretch and shrink like living things. Dust lifts in tiny spirals near the ground where people pass, then settles again. Even the dust is patient. And then, at last, the sound becomes clear. Wheels on stone, hooves, a slow approach, measured and inevitable. Victoria stays at the window, perfectly still, while inside her the world shifts by a fraction, like a compass needle turning toward something it did not expect. Because the next face she sees will not be the face of a boy at a birthday ball. It will be the face of a young man returning. And the return will pull at every careful wall she has built around her heart. Just one more breath, and we will meet him again. The evening settles into Windsor like a velvet curtain. You can almost hear the castle changing its voice as the sun lowers. During the day, Windsor is busy with footsteps and orders. Doors opening and closing, paper moved from hand to hand. At night, it becomes something older. The stone holds cold. The corridors lengthen. Candlelight makes everything look gentler than it truly is. Victoria waits at the window. There is a kind of waiting that is public, the waiting of a monarch receiving guests. And then there is the waiting that happens underneath, where the body does small betrayals. A hand that tightens on a curtain. A breath that catches and then is forced to smooth itself out. A pulse that refuses to be commanded. The carriage finally rolls through the gates. Its wheels make a low sound over the ground, a soft grind, like distant thunder that has decided to behave. Horses exhale white breath in the cool air. Men in livery move with practiced precision, as if each motion has been rehearsed for years. And then Albert steps down. Later, Victoria will reach for her journal the way some people reach for prayer. She will write that she beheld him with emotion, and that this time he was not merely handsome. He was beautiful. That word matters. Beautiful is not a diplomatic adjective. Beautiful is what you say when your defenses have slipped a little, when your honesty has gotten ahead of your caution. Albert is 20 now. He has traveled. He has studied. He carries himself differently, like a man who has been forced to meet his own mind and stay there. His shoulders are broader than the boy she met at 17. His face is more defined. There is a faint touch of facial hair, delicate, careful, as if he is still deciding what kind of man he will be. Victoria, queen though she is, finds herself doing the most human thing in the world. She notices details. The line of his mouth when he smiles. The way his eyes hold steadier than she remembers. The way his posture suggests he is not just enduring the English court, but observing it. And the strange part is that Albert does not seem to try. He is polite. Yes. He is careful. Yes. But there is no frantic hunger in him, no greedy lean toward her power. If anything, he feels restrained, almost wary, as though he understands the danger of being too eager. That restraint is one of the things that pulls her closer, because Victoria has spent 3 years surrounded by people who want something from her. Ministers want decisions. Courtiers want favor. Newspapers want a story. Foreign powers want an alliance. Even kindness can feel like strategy. Albert, in these first hours, feels like something else. Like a person. The next days become a quiet whirlwind. There are dinners that stretch long. Plates are cleared and replaced. Silver catches candlelight. A servant pours wine, then steps away, then returns like a tide. Voices soften when Victoria enters a room, and then, gradually, when Albert is beside her, the room begins to loosen, because he has a way of making formality feel less sharp. They talk about music. They sit at a piano and play together. And this is where the story slows, as stories should. When something intimate is happening without any spectacle. Imagine the piano keys, smooth under the fingertips. Imagine the sound of the first chord, low and gentle, floating into a room that has held hundreds of years of royal conversations. Imagine Victoria's hands, trained to sign documents and hold gloves and perform grace, now doing something simple, something honest, pressing keys in time with another person. Albert's hands are close to hers, not touching, not quite, but close enough that the warmth between them feels real. There is a moment, sometimes, when two people playing music together begin to breathe at the same pace. They do not plan it. It happens, and in that shared rhythm, Victoria feels something she has been starving for, to be seen as Victoria, not as a crown. She watches Albert speak with her court. She watches him listen. He is educated, yes, but he does not show it like a weapon. He seems to weigh his words before letting them fall. That patience is soothing to her, because she is not naturally patient. She is quick, emotional, fierce. She can feel insult like a spark on skin. Albert is different. Where she feels fire, he brings coolness. And if you have ever been exhausted by your own intensity, you know how comforting that can be. To be near someone whose calm does not shame you, but steadies you. By the 4th day, her mind is made up. She tells Lord Melbourne, her Prime Minister, the man she trusts more than she trusts most people, that she has decided to marry Albert. If you have ever made a decision that quickly, you know the strange blend of certainty and fear. The mind says yes, and the body says, "Are you sure?" And then, under all of it, a softer voice says, "You cannot unfeel what you feel now." But there is a problem that is almost absurd in its simplicity. Victoria is the queen. And in the strict logic of her world, no one can propose to a reigning monarch. A man cannot kneel and ask. It would be presumptuous, even dangerous. The ritual of proposal is reversed by hierarchy. So if Victoria wants this marriage, she must do something that feels both bold and strangely tender. She must ask him herself. On October 15th, Ichen Babay Sensijo, she summons Albert to her private room. Private rooms in palaces are never truly private. Of course, there are servants outside doors. There are ears in corridors. There is always the sense that the walls remember. But in that room, for that moment, there are only two people. Victoria's heart is loud in her chest. Her throat feels dry. The air smells faintly of candle smoke and fabric. She can hear the small sounds of the room, the shift of a chair, the soft scrape of a boot. She speaks, and Albert says yes. They embrace. Again and again, she writes, Kind, affectionate. There is a relief in that word. Yes, that is deeper than romance. It is the relief of being chosen without being used. The relief of letting herself be vulnerable and not being punished for it. And then the world finds out. The engagement becomes public, and the fairy tale hits the hard edge of reality. Albert is foreign, German, from a place many English politicians still consider small, almost laughable. Suspicion gathers quickly, like fog rising off a river. Questions are asked, not softly, not kindly. What will he be called? What will he do? How much will he cost? Parliament debates his allowance, as if it is a measure of his worth. There is precedent. They know it. Prince Leopold, years earlier, had received £50,000 a year when he married Princess Charlotte. Victoria expects Albert to be treated the same. Parliament offers 30,000. It is not just money. It is a message. You are not one of us. You are not equal. You are tolerated. Victoria is furious, and it is one of her first real lessons in the limits of her power. She can be queen and still be outvoted. She can desire and still be denied. She fights for Albert anyway, because that is how she loves. She pushes. She argues. She refuses to pretend she is not wounded. But she loses. Albert receives the smaller amount. And then comes the title question, which sounds like a detail until you feel the weight of it. Victoria wants him to be called king, not to rule, not to outrank her in practice, but to acknowledge their partnership. The idea is shut down immediately. In the British hierarchy, king outranks queen. Even a title could become a threat. Even a word could rearrange power. So Albert will be her husband. And still, officially, only a prince. Imagine what that would feel like for him. To leave home, to step into a foreign court, to be watched with suspicion, to be measured by men who do not know you, to be assigned a value and a place. And yet, he stays. This is the part people often skip when they talk about devotion later. They look at Victoria's long mourning and forget that Albert's sacrifice begins here, in humiliation, endured quietly, in a life agreed to where he will always stand, half a step behind, no matter how capable he is. Sometimes love is not loud. Sometimes love is simply staying. The wedding is set for February 10th. İçin Babay Sishir. 2 months. 2 months to pack a life into trunks. 2 months to say goodbye to a country that shaped him. 2 months for Victoria to prepare to share her space, her schedule, her authority, her very identity with another person after years of fighting for control. And while the court busies itself with plans, Victoria's private mind returns again and again to the fact that she chose this. She did not accept a proposal. She made the proposal. That choice is like a small flame she carries inside her, protected, even when the wind of politics tries to snuff it out. The days move forward. In palace rooms, fabrics are measured. Lace is examined. Candles are ordered. Carriages are inspected. The city itself seems to hum with anticipation, as if London can feel history approaching. And in the quiet places, the places no one applauds, Victoria and Albert are learning the first hard truth of partnership. That love may be personal, but it does not exist in private. It exists in public, in newspapers, in parliamentary votes, in rules older than both of them, in the silent judgments of people who will never know what it costs to hold your heart steady while a whole nation watches your hands. If you listen very closely, you can hear, far away, the faint beginning of another sound. A sound like a door closing. Not yet. Not now. But later. For now, there is still a wedding to walk toward, one careful step at a time, through candlelight and cold stone. February 10th, 1840, arrive. Inside Buckingham Palace, mourning is hushed in that peculiar way. Great houses become hushed when everyone is busy. Outside, London is already crowded, a cold sea of faces waiting for a glimpse of their young queen. Victoria chooses white, not the deep colors royal brides have worn for generations, but white, satin, and lace, bright as candle flame against winter air. In that choice, there is a quiet message to herself. This is not only politics. This is a woman choosing a life. The ceremony is held in daylight, early afternoon, so the streets can witness it. Carriages roll, horses stamp, cheers rise and soften again as they echo between buildings. In the chapel, wax glows against old stone and the air smells faintly of prayer and smoke. Victoria walks forward, the fabric of her dress moving like a slow tide around her feet, and Albert waits, composed, careful, almost too still. They speak the vows. Later, Victoria writes in her journal with unguarded joy, speaking of affection and gratitude, of feeling loved, of kisses that made the world seem briefly simple. Nothing that needs to be said in detail. only that her heart finally has a place to rest. The honeymoon lasts 2 days. Then Victoria insists they return to work. Papers do not wait. Ministers do not wait. The empire does not pause for tenderness. It is practical. And it is a first taste of how marriage will be lived under a crown. Albert begins to understand the shape of his position. He has no official power, no clear role, no title that matches his ability. He is, as he will later admit, only the husband, not the master in the house. In his era, that is not a small discomfort. It is a quiet humiliation. Victoria loves him. And still, she has spent years guarding her independence. Their early marriage is not only romance, it is adjustment. Two strong wills learning how to share a single space. And then, slowly, something intimate and practical happens. Desks. Victoria has their desks placed side by side, so close their sleeves nearly touch when they lean over papers. Imagine them there in lamplight, ink drying, documents spread like pale leaves, the faint scratch of a pen. In that small arrangement, a partnership begins to form. Albert's calm steadies Victoria's quick fire. His patience cools her sharp edges. Her authority gives his purpose a direction. It does not solve everything. It simply creates a rhythm. For now, that is enough. Because the darker truth is still waiting far ahead, like weather gathering beyond the horizon. And we will reach it together, one quiet step at a time. So let the image linger. 2 desks, one pool of candlelight, dust turning slowly in the warm air above the papers. Outside, the world keeps moving, loud and hungry, but inside that small circle of light, they begin to learn how to breathe together. And when you are ready, we will follow them into the years that tested this rhythm. Years of children, strain, and a grief that would one day reshape an empire into silence. The months after the wedding feel like waking up inside a new life and realizing the walls have not moved as much as you hoped. Buckingham Palace gives Victoria space. Yes, but it also gives her echoing corridors that swallow her footsteps and send them back to her, as if the building itself is listening. At night, when the candles are pinched out one by one, the air still tastes faintly of wax and smoke, and the rooms can feel enormous, too large for one young woman to fill with certainty. Albert is there beside her, and in the beginning that seems like the simplest miracle. But simplicity does not last long in a palace. He is 20, newly married, newly arrived in a country that watches him the way a guard dog watches a stranger near the gate. He has studied law and philosophy. He can speak with ease about economics and art, and yet his official role is thin as paper. He is expected to stand beside Victoria at ceremonies, to bow, to smile, to be agreeable. Sometimes, when the day has been full of formal smiles, he returns to his rooms and finds he has nowhere to put the rest of himself. Victoria adores him and still feels the old reflex, the tight grip on control she learned as a child. It is not cruelty, it is survival. And there is another presence in their marriage, quiet and constant, like a draft that slips under every door. Baroness Leitzen, Victoria's former governess, has been part of her inner life for so long that she feels almost like family. Leitzen knows the rhythm of Victoria's moods, knows how to soothe her, knows what makes her stubborn and what makes her afraid. To Victoria, Leitzen represents safety, the one person who stood beside her through the suffocating Kensington System and the early days of being queen. To Albert, Leitzen is something else. She is a gatekeeper, a keeper of keys, a person who can move through the palace with authority that feels, to him, like an insult. In his era, a husband is expected to master the household. Here, the household has already been mastered by someone else. You can feel the tension in small things first. A request answered too slowly. A room arranged the way Leitzen prefers rather than the way Albert suggests. A servant who looks to Leitzen for direction even when Albert is in the room. The palace is full of soft sounds, slippers on stone, the whisper of skirts, the rustle of papers, and yet the quietest sound is the one inside Albert, the sound of pride being forced to swallow itself again and again. Victoria notices his discomfort, but she also feels a flare of resistance. She has been controlled before. She will not be controlled again, even by a husband she loves. So their early marriage contains joy and sharpness, tenderness and friction, all mixed together like smoke and lamplight. They try to build a rhythm. That is what the desks were about. Those two desks, placed side by side, the shared pool of candlelight, the ink, the papers, the way their sleeves nearly brushed when they leaned over state documents. When it worked, it felt like a secret victory. Two people together against the immense machine of empire. When it did not work, it felt like a trap. Too close. Too many eyes. Too little air. Then a child arrives, and the palace learns a new kind of sound. On November 21st, Item Babe Sisher, their first baby is born, a daughter. The world will call her Vicky. Victoria holds her child and feels something complicated, something she cannot confess in public. She loves the idea of her family, the image of it, the promise of it. She does not love the physical ordeal that brought the baby into the world. Her letters and journals, those honest private spaces, tell a harsher truth. Pregnancy feels like a shadow side of marriage, she writes. The loss of control, the discomfort, the fear. In her day, childbirth still carries the faint scent of danger. There's no modern safety net, no neat reassurance. Women die in childbirth often enough that even queens cannot pretend it will not happen. So Victoria is frightened, and fear sometimes turns into anger. Sometimes it turns into a cold resentment that makes her feel guilty afterward. Honestly, that mixture is so human, it almost hurts. loving your life and hating what it demands from your body, wanting to be strong, and then discovering strength has limits. After the baby is born, Victoria's moods shift in ways that are hard to name in her era. Today we might call it postpartum depression, or anxiety, or the way hormones can turn the mind into a storm. Back then, people used words like hysteria, or weakness, or worse, madness. There is a family ghost in those whispers, the memory of George III, the grandfather who suffered episodes that frightened a nation. Victoria hears the echoes of that story and wonders if it lives in her blood. Albert sees what is happening and does something unexpectedly gentle for a man of his time. He does not try to dominate her. He does not threaten or punish. He tries to protect her dignity. When she becomes too volatile, too sharp, too close to hurting herself or others, he steps away. He retreats to his own rooms, not as an abandonment, but as a boundary. And he writes her notes, patient notes, slipped quietly under a door, like small lanterns in the dark. He tells her, in essence, if you become violent, I will leave to give you time to recover. And then you may send for me if you wish. You may send for me if you wish. That line carries so much. It gives her choice when she feels out of control. It says, I will not fight you, but I will return when you are ready. And sometimes, late at night, when the palace is still and the only sound is a coal settling in a grate, Victoria reads those notes and feels her anger melt into exhaustion. This is where their partnership becomes more than romance. It becomes a daily practice of surviving each other's wounds. But the battles do not stop. Lazen remains, and the tension around her grows. There is a moment often told by biographers, a small domestic crisis that becomes a symbol. Their little daughter Vicky is unwell, feverish, restless, not eating properly. Albert believes the nursery is too hot, that the child needs fresh air, cooler rooms, a change in routine. Lazen insists on warmth and stillness. It sounds like a simple disagreement about childcare. In truth, it is a proxy war, a struggle over authority. Who decides what happens inside the queen's private world? The husband or the woman who raised her? Days pass with tight voices and polite masks. Victoria, torn, defends Lazen at first. She is loyal in a way that is almost fierce. Lazen has been her protector. Removing her feels like betrayal of the girl she used to be. Albert reaches a point where he cannot swallow it anymore. He writes an ultimatum, not shouted in anger, but written, formal, undeniable. Either Lazen's control ends, or the marriage cannot function as a true partnership. He lays out the ways Lazen's influence harms their household, their children, and Victoria herself. Imagine Victoria reading that letter. Imagine her hands trembling just slightly, the paper making a soft sound as she grips it. Imagine the room smelling of ink and candle smoke. Outside, life continues. Servants passing, clocks ticking. But inside, a young queen is being asked to choose between her past and her future. She chooses Albert. The choice nearly breaks her heart. Lazen is pensioned off, sent away, removed from the center of Victoria's life. Victoria writes sorrowful letters afterward. Guilt lingers like dust in the corners of her mind. She does not stop loving Lazen, but she accepts that her marriage must be the place where her life rests. And after that, something shifts. Albert gains ground, slowly, not through force, but through persistence and competence. Victoria begins to trust him with more decisions, not as a courtesy, but as a need. The desks remain side by side, and now the closeness feels less like intrusion and more like shared weight. There is an old story, repeated often, about a locked door. It is said that, during a fierce argument, Albert withdrew to his rooms and locked himself in. Victoria followed, angry, pounding on the door. Albert called out, "Who is it?" Victoria answered, "The Queen of England." "Silence," he replied, and did not open. She knocked again. "Who is it this time?" she said softly. "Your wife." And then he opened. It is debated whether the scene happened exactly like that. Some scholars argue it has been polished into a parable. Still, even if it is only partly true, it carries the emotional truth of their marriage. Victoria had to learn, again and again, to be both sovereign and partner, to hold power and still choose vulnerability. That lesson costs her something each time. And yet, it also gives her something, a home within another person. By the mid-1840s, they have more children. The palace nursery fills with small breaths, small cries, the soft shuffle of nurses at night. Victoria's body becomes a calendar of pregnancies. She resents it, and then feels guilty for resenting it. She wants to be both queen and free woman, and her biology refuses to negotiate. Albert throws himself into fatherhood and education with the same intensity he brings to everything. He oversees tutors. He plans routines. He designs learning as if it is a fortress that can protect his children from the chaos of the world. They buy Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, a retreat where the air smells of salt and damp earth, where the wind carries the breath of the sea. There, away from London's constant gaze, they try to create something like normal family life. Albert cannot help himself. He redesigns. He plans gardens. He supervises building. Even leisure becomes work. Sometimes I imagine him walking through Osborne's grounds early in the morning, the grass wet with dew, his boots darkening as they move. He is thinking, always thinking, about improvement, about order, about making a world that feels safe and bright. But beneath his energy, there is a darker pattern beginning to form, quiet as a slow drip of water in a stone corridor. He does not rest. He does not know how. And Victoria, who loves him and depends on him, does not yet understand the price that will be paid for that devotion. For now, the fire still burns. The children still laugh. The desks still sit side by side in lamplight. The palace still smells of ink and wax and old stone. Outside, history is moving. It is moving toward hunger, toward illness, toward an empire that will ask more and more of these two people who have tried to turn love into a form of governance. And soon, very soon, they will face a tragedy that cannot be solved by patience or paper or the neat geometry of plans. If you were standing here with me, by the hearth in this dim room, you might hear how even memory has its own sound. A page turned too slowly. The tiny scratch of a quill, the way a seal is pressed into warm wax and lifted again, leaving its mark like a bruise that does not bleed. The way Victoria's ring taps the edge of a desk when she hesitates, thinking, not only as a queen, but as a young woman learning which parts of herself must bend and which must remain unbroken. And you might notice the servants, too, moving like shadows. They do not speak much in these private corridors. They know the walls have ears, and that a careless word can travel faster than a carriage in London fog. Their hands smell of soap and linen. Their shoes whisper on polished floors. They carry hot water and cold water, trays of tea, stacks of correspondence that feel heavier than they look, because each sheet of paper contains someone's request, someone's fear, someone's demand. Sometimes, late at night, Victoria walks alone for a few steps, testing the freedom she once begged for. She lets her fingers glide along a banister worn smooth by centuries, as if the wood itself has been softened by the touch of countless hands. She pauses beside a window and watches the city lights flicker far away. There is always a faint haze over London, a mixture of coal, smoke, and damp air. It makes the world look like it has been rubbed with ash. In those moments, she feels the loneliness of command again. The higher you stand, the fewer people you can speak to without performing. Even love has to learn the language of court. Albert, in his own rooms, sometimes stands very still, listening to the palace settle. Pipes creak. A distant door closes. Somewhere, a baby sighs. He tells himself that this is his life now. He will make himself useful. He will not be ornamental. He will become so necessary that no one can doubt his place again. That decision is both beautiful and dangerous. Because when a person makes usefulness into a religion, the altar always asks for more. For now, let the scene soften. A corridor at night, a candle guttering, dust drifting in a thin beam of light, a distant sound of waves at Osborne, steady and indifferent, as if the sea has always known how every human story ends. And in that steadiness, we can take the next step together, into the years when their partnership became not just personal, but historical, when their shared work began to shape a nation, and when the darker currents beneath Victorian progress began to show their teeth in silence. The years slip forward the way candle wax slips down the side of a holder, slow and inevitable, leaving a pale trail that hardens into history. Victoria and Albert are no longer simply a young couple learning each other. They are a system, a pair of hands on the same wheel. In the palace, their desks remain side by side. Papers arrive in stacks. Some are crisp and clean, some faintly smudged as if they have traveled through too many hands. When you lift a page, you can smell the ink and the dust of storage rooms, the faint metallic scent of seals broken open. There is a kind of museum hush that develops around their work, not because it is quiet, but because everyone knows the stakes. Servants move carefully. Ministers speak with measured voices. The empire is so vast that it feels almost imaginary, like a map too large to unfold without tearing. And yet, the darkest truths often arrive as small details. A report of hunger, a letter describing sickness, a petition from a widow who has lost her income, a minister's neat summary of suffering reduced to numbers. Numbers have a way of shrinking a human being, don't they? They turn breath into statistics. They turn a family into a line on a page. Victoria reads these documents and sometimes feels her chest tighten as if the paper itself carries a weight. Albert notices. He becomes the one who steadies the room. Not because he does not feel, but because he has trained himself to hold emotion in his hands without spilling it. He channels feeling into action, into letters, into carefully phrased arguments, into plans that might soften a catastrophe. In 1845, that catastrophe comes from across the water. Ireland's potato crop begins to fail. At first, it is described with cautious language, a blight, a disease, as if naming it gently might make it less real. But the letters continue. The reports grow darker. People who depend on the potato for survival find their fields turning black and soft, as if the earth itself has been bruised. The famine is not a single moment. It is a season that refuses to end. There is a coldness to hunger that is hard to explain. It is not only the absence of food, it is the way the body becomes thin and quiet, the way breath becomes shallow, the way the mind narrows until it can think of nothing else. Even the language of those years carries a dryness, like dust in the mouth. Victoria is devastated by what she hears. She feels anger and helplessness tangled together. She is queen, but she cannot simply command solutions into existence. The government debates policy. Ministers argue about economics and trade, about precedent and ideology. While people die, Albert steps in beside her, quietly, relentlessly. He helps draft letters urging stronger intervention. He helps Victoria find words that are firm without becoming reckless. They give money personally, a sum that is meaningful in their era, and they encourage others to give as well. Did it solve the catastrophe? No. That is one of the cruelest truths about power. Even power draped in crowns has limits, and suffering does not always respond to good intentions. Some historians call those years a stain of neglect. Others argue about what could have been done, what policies might have saved more lives. It is debated, and the debate itself feels like another kind of coldness. Still, inside the palace, The effort is real. Their partnership becomes a way to endure the knowledge that there are tragedies a ruler cannot fully prevent. And while hunger spreads in one corner of their realm, the modern world keeps arriving at their door like an impatient guest. Steam and iron, glass and light, telegraph wires humming with new possibility. Albert is fascinated by progress, not as a toy, but as a tool. He believes innovation should serve human welfare. Education, science, industry, public health, art, all of it. He wants it woven into the fabric of society so that a nation can become stronger without becoming cruel. Sometimes, late at night, when the palace finally quiets, he is still awake. He is writing memoranda, drafting speeches, planning committees. The candle burns lower, the air cools, and his mind refuses to sleep. The coal in the grate settles with a soft crackle, like a reminder that even fire can be exhausted. Victoria watches him and worries. She tells him to rest. He promises he will, and then returns to the desk. If you have ever loved someone who cannot slow down, you know that feeling. The admiration and the dread. The sense that their brilliance is also the blade that will cut them. In 1851, his obsession with progress takes on a form so vast it seems almost unreal. The Great Exhibition. The idea is bold, almost startling in its optimism. Gather inventions and art from around the world. Celebrate human achievement. Build a space large enough to hold the future under one roof. At first, people mock it. Satirists draw cartoons. Critics complain about cost and chaos, about foreigners crowding London, about the madness of constructing a building made of glass and iron in the middle of Hyde Park. Albert listens to the doubts and then keeps going. The Crystal Palace rises like a dream made solid. Glass panes catch daylight and break it into soft reflections. Iron ribs curve overhead like the skeleton of some gentle, transparent creature. When you walk inside, the sound changes. Voices lift and echo. Footsteps become a rhythmic tapping on the floor, a chorus of human curiosity. There are machines that breathe steam. There are textiles like rivers of color. There are scientific instruments that look like delicate bones of knowledge. There is art. There are objects brought from faraway places that most visitors will never see with their own eyes. 6 million people come through, they say. A number so large, it becomes hard to imagine as individual bodies. But if you slow down and picture it, you can almost see the flow of them, day after day, moving beneath the glass, their faces lit by sunlight. It is as if a whole nation steps into a museum that did not exist before, a museum of the present. And when the exhibition ends, it makes a profit. The money becomes a seed for institutions, museums, and educational projects that will endure. The Victoria and Albert Museum, the Science Museum, the Natural History Museum, all part of that ripple, the hush of those future galleries, the slow footsteps of visitors centuries later, all echoing back to Albert's insistence that knowledge and beauty should not belong only to the elite. The public begins to see him differently, not as the foreign prince, not as the suspicious outsider. As a builder, Victoria feels pride that is almost fierce. She attends the exhibition again and again, sometimes with their children, watching their faces as they look up at the glass ceiling and the strange machines and the display cases. She can see the future forming around them, and for a moment it feels bright. They create traditions, too, sometimes without realizing they are doing it. A white wedding dress becomes a fashion that spreads outward like a soft tide. A Christmas tree in their home, lit and decorated, becomes an image that makes people want to create their own private winter warmth. Photography, still new, captures their family in a way paintings never could. Ordinary people can finally see their monarch not as a myth, but as a person. At Osborne, they try to make childhood feel less like a ceremony and more like a life. Albert has a Swiss cottage built for the children, a miniature house where small hands can learn the stubborn logic of the real world. Tiny garden plots, little wheelbarrows with initials painted neatly on the wood, the scent of turned soil, the cool damp of morning on leaves, the patient work of planting, waiting, harvesting. There is something calming in that, even for a monarch. The way a seed does not care about rank, the way it responds only to water and sun and time. Sometimes the children sell their vegetables back to their father for a few coins, a game that teaches value and effort. They laugh, they squabble, they forget, for a moment, that their names are not fully their own, that their futures are already mapped by duty. In those garden hours, you can almost pretend the empire is far away. But even there, in that sea air, the letters arrive, the dispatches, the petitions, the endless paper river that flows toward their desks. The smell of the ink follows them like a faithful shadow, and the palace rituals of morning culture begin to thicken in the wider world, too. Not yet in their own lives, not in the way it will later, but as a background music of their century. Black crepe in shop windows, jet jewelry in the hands of grieving women, the careful, socially approved choreography of sorrow. It is strange, isn't it, how a society can be obsessed with progress and death at the same time. Glass palaces and graveyards, telegraph wires and funeral veils. Victoria and Albert live in that contradiction, whether they want to or not. But behind the pictures, behind the posed stillness, life remains complicated. There are 9 children, eventually. There are arguments. There are exhausted nights. There is the constant push and pull between Victoria's need for independence and her growing reliance on Albert's steadiness. By the late 1850s, ministers often speak with Albert before they speak with Victoria. Some complain that he holds influence without formal accountability. Others quietly admit that the system works because he works, because he does not stop. Albert champions education. He visits schools. He asks awkward questions about funding and overcrowding and broken equipment. He supports technical training, science, practical skills. He believes the new industrial world requires minds that can build and repair and understand. He speaks against slavery and the trade in human bodies, aligning himself with abolitionist ideals, even when politics makes such positions uncomfortable. He concerns himself with housing conditions in crowded cities, with sanitation, with the unseen rivers of filth that run beneath the new industrial prosperity. He cannot fix everything. No one can. But he tries to pull the monarchy towards service rather than spectacle. All the while, he is burning himself. There is a wordless rhythm to overwork. Wake before dawn. Write. Meet. Advise. Visit. Return. Write again. Sleep too little. Repeat. It is a rhythm that feels almost hypnotic from the outside, like watching a candle flame dance until, suddenly, you realize the wick has grown short. Victoria senses it. She begs him to rest at Balmoral or Osborne, where the air is cleaner and the days can be slower. Albert agrees, and then fills even leisure with projects, redesigning gardens, planning buildings, organizing education for the children as if their future can be secured by enough structure. And somewhere in this bright era of progress, mortality waits, quiet as dust. Not as a dramatic figure, not as a looming shadow, more like a thin ache ignored, a recurring stomach pain dismissed, a fatigue attributed to duty. It is tempting to believe that love and intelligence can outwork death, but history rarely rewards that belief. For now, the palace still glows with candlelight. Papers still pass from hand to hand. The telegraph clicks in another room, tiny pulses traveling through wires like distant heartbeats. Outside, London breathes coal smoke into the night sky, and the river moves through the darkness, carrying reflections of lamps that tremble and break and reform. Sometimes, in the very late hours, Victoria walks to the nursery door and pauses. She does not go in. She only listens. The soft rise and fall of many sleeping breaths. The occasional small sound a child makes when dreaming. The creak of a rocking chair as a nurse shifts her weight. The faint scent of milk and clean linen mixed with the older scent of palace stone. In that listening, she feels both comfort and an ache, because every child is a promise and also a vulnerability. Soon, the story will turn again. Soon, a scandal involving their heir will crack open old fears. Soon, illness will enter the Blue Room at Windsor and refuse to leave. But tonight, let us linger for a little longer in the years when their partnership looked unstoppable, when the Crystal Palace shimmered like a promise, and when two desks in a palace held the weight of an empire in the warm circle of lamplight. Just one more slow breath, and we will step toward the darker chapter waiting beyond the glass. The strange thing about a long, happy rhythm is how it hides the first tiny cracks. In public, Victoria and Albert look like certainty made flesh. They arrive at openings and receptions with their children, arranged like living symbols, and the crowd sees a family monarchy, wholesome and bright, a promise that the institution is safe and modern and somehow human. In private, the palace is less like a symbol and more like a machine that never sleeps. Even when the family retreats to Balmoral or Osborne, the air tasting of pine or sea salt, the world follows them. Dispatch boxes, sealed packets, notes from ministers, invitations that cannot be refused. The quiet insistence of duty. Albert keeps working. He works the way some people breathe, without thinking about it, without questioning whether it is wise. If his mind is awake, it reaches automatically for the next thing that needs to be improved. A school that needs funding, a design that could be more efficient, a letter that must be drafted in exactly the right tone so it persuades without provoking. You can almost hear it, that constant scratch of pen on paper, the soft rasp of a page turned, the tap of a seal against warm wax. The sound is gentle, but the pattern is relentless. And when the palace grows still at night, you might notice something else. A faint unease under their beauty. The industrial age is transforming Britain. Yes, but it is also tightening the world. Cities swell. Streets grow crowded. Smoke thickens in winter air. There are new machines and new wealth, but also new forms of exhaustion. New kinds of poverty pressed into tight rooms where breath feels shared and thin. Albert sees this and feels responsibility in his bones. He visits institutions meant to improve laboring life. He listens to reformers talk about sanitation and housing, about child labor and long hours. He cannot change everything. He knows it. Still, he tries to bend the monarchy toward service, to make privilege feel less like theft and more like stewardship. Victoria watches him and sometimes feels a quiet gratitude that is almost painful, because she knows how easily power can rot. She has seen it in the behavior of her uncles, in the scandal and selfishness that threatened the crown before she took it. She has seen it in the way a court can encourage indulgence, can applaud vanity, can make a person believe they are above consequence. Albert is a counterweight, a steady hand, a mind that returns again and again to duty. And yet, the same qualities that make him admirable also make him fragile. In the late 1850s, people close to him begin to notice he looks older than his years. His face is still handsome, but there is a drawn tightness around the eyes. His skin sometimes appears pale in candlelight. He has recurring stomach pains. He tires more easily. He brushes it off, the way a person brushes ash off a sleeve. There is always too much to do, he says. He will rest soon, he says. And Victoria, who depends on him for so much, hears those words and chooses to believe them, because believing them is easier than imagining the alternative. Their children grow. Their family becomes a small nation of personalities. Some are studious. Some are wild. Some are gentle. Some stubborn. Albert tries to shape them, with education and discipline. Victoria loves them fiercely and also resents how motherhood has held her body hostage for years. She writes things privately that would shock polite society, and that shock is part of the truth. She is a queen, but she is also a woman who has felt the physical cost of being asked to produce heirs. In those years, you can sense a darker question forming, quiet and persistent. What happens if the system built around Albert stops? What happens if he cannot keep holding everything together? Nobody wants to ask. Not out loud. Then, as if fate has been waiting for the right moment, the year 1861 arrives with a strange symmetry. 21 years since their wedding. 21 years of building, of compromise, of tradition reshaped into something new. Victoria commemorates the anniversary, and there is a photograph taken. Albert stands beside her, and he looks dignified, but tired. Victoria looks up at him with something like pride and dependence woven together. The image feels like a pause before a storm. And the storm does not begin in Parliament, or in some foreign war, or in a grand political crisis. It begins in the private weakness of their eldest son, Bertie, Albert Edward, Prince of Wales. He is charming, sociable, restless, not cruel, not wicked in some fairy tale sense, just young, privileged, and too easily pulled toward pleasure. He has been educated and supervised, pushed and scolded. His parents want him to embody the moral uprightness that has become the public face of their reign. But the boy is not his father, and that difference frightens them. In Ireland, at the Curragh, where Bertie is meant to learn military discipline, a foolish prank unfolds into something more. An actress, a hidden visit, laughter that turns into an affair. In another royal family, it might have been shrugged off as a youthful indiscretion. Courts are full of such things, after all. But Victoria and Albert have built their world on the promise that they are different, that they have replaced scandal with virtue, excess with duty, selfishness with service. So when news reaches them, it feels like betrayal. Victoria's anger turns outward, as anger often does. She condemns the woman involved, using words that reflect her era's habits of blame. It is easier, perhaps, to name a villain than to accept that her son made choices too. Albert's reaction is deeper than anger. He is devastated. He sees the affair not only as a risk of scandal, but as a rejection of everything he has tried to teach. Duty, restraint, honor, the ability to govern one's own desires. He fears what the newspapers might do. He fears what Parliament might whisper. He fears the possibility of pregnancy, of public humiliation. But beneath those practical fears, there is something more personal, a sense of failure. He has poured himself into the education of his children, as if education could save them from the dark patterns of power. Now he feels that fortress crumbling. On November 25th, Etan Babai Loshi, Albert decides he must confront Bertie himself. He travels to Cambridge in miserable weather, Cold rain soaking the world, turning streets to slick stone, and making breath feel sharp in the throat. He is already unwell, already tired in ways he does not fully admit. Still, he goes. If you were standing there, you might picture him wrapped in a heavy coat, the fabric darkened with rain, his boots leaving wet marks on the ground. You might see his shoulders slightly hunched against the wind, not only from the cold, but from the weight of what he must say. Father and son walk. They talk. The conversation is long, difficult, filled with disappointment and pleading. Albert tries to make Bertie understand the seriousness of his actions. Bertie is contrite. He apologizes. He promises to do better. He seems, at least in that moment, to grasp the consequences. Albert writes to Victoria afterward, trying to sound hopeful. Perhaps this crisis will mature the boy, he suggests. Perhaps it will be the making of him. But when Albert returns, he is worse. The cold has settled into his body. The stress has tightened around his chest. The stomach pains that have haunted him for months flare. He becomes exhausted in a way that sleep does not fix. Days pass. The palace continues its routines, but the mood shifts. Servants move more quietly. Doctors are summoned. Advice is offered. Treatments are prescribed with confidence that is more ritual than science. Albert does not recover. Instead, he weakens. He can no longer sit at his desk for long. The papers pile up, as if the empire itself refuses to slow down, even when the man holding it together begins to fade. Victoria watches this and feels fear rise in her throat like smoke. She has always believed Albert is the steady center, the person who makes her role bearable, the person who reads her moods and calms them, who balances her impulses, who offers the quiet logic that keeps decisions from becoming storms. Now she sees him lying in bed, and the room feels unfamiliar, a place where the rules have changed. Doctors whisper a diagnosis: typhoid fever. In that era, the word carries a chill all its own. It means uncertainty. It means danger. It means the possibility that a life can slip away without anyone being able to stop it. Victoria refuses to accept it. He is 42, she tells herself. Not old, not ready. They are supposed to have decades more. But Albert seems to know. On December 13th, he asks to see the children. All of them. One by one, they come to his bedside. The room smells faintly of medicine and linen and coal smoke. Candlelight trembles on the walls. Albert's voice is soft, sometimes barely above a whisper, and yet the children listen with a stillness that feels too mature for their ages. He speaks to them with love and instruction. Be good. Take care of your mother. Remember duty. Remember kindness. Remember that your lives are not only for yourselves. Victoria watches and feels something inside her twist, because this is goodbye. Even if she cannot say it, even if she will not say it. Late on December 14th, 1888, in the Blue Room at Windsor Castle, Albert takes his last breath. The moment is quiet, in the way moments like that often are. The body simply stops. The room changes. The air becomes heavy. Time feels strange. Victoria is holding his hand, and when she realizes he is gone, she makes a sound that carries through the palace. A raw cry that is not polished by royal training. Not a speech, not a ceremony. A human noise, the sound of a person breaking. Outside, the night continues. The castle walls hold the cold. The wind touches the windows. Somewhere, a servant's footsteps pause, then hurry away. And in the hours that follow, the empire is still there. The papers still wait. The minister still needs signatures. The machine still demands motion. But the man who made it bearable is gone, and Victoria is left with a silence so large it feels like a new kind of kingdom. Breathe slowly here. Let the firelight soften. Let the story settle like dust in a beam of candlelight. Because what comes next is not only the death of a husband, it is the birth of a mourning that will reshape a woman, an institution, and a century. And it begins, quietly, with a single color that will swallow the years to come. There are evenings in those final years before the rupture, when Victoria tries to manufacture peace by arranging small, domestic scenes, as if she can hold time in place by choosing the right lamp, the right music, the right chair. A piano is opened in a drawing room. The lid lifts with a soft wooden sigh. A candle is set near the music stand, and the flame leans slightly, pulled by a draft from a corridor. Albert turns pages with careful fingers, the paper whispering, and Victoria sits close enough to feel the warmth of his sleeve when he shifts. They play a duet, and for a while the empire becomes distant, a hush beyond the windows. Honestly, I have always found it strange how a single melody can make a person believe, for a minute, that nothing bad can happen. But bad things do not announce themselves with drums. Often they arrive disguised as fatigue. Albert's fatigue is not dramatic. It is a slow leaking away. He hides pain behind good manners. He tells Victoria he is only tired, only a little unwell. And then he reaches for another stack of papers, as if work itself is a tonic. And Victoria, seeing him like that, feels a brief, sharp panic and then pushes it down. Because a queen cannot live on panic. She leans on him until the smallest spark in the family, the careless indulgence of a son, falls into dry timber. And then everything that has been held together by patience, work, and shared breath begins to shake. People still speak of Albert's Crystal Palace as if it were a dream made of glass, a place where daylight itself felt domesticated. When Victoria hears those memories repeated, she feels pride and then something like dread. Because even pride can feel like pressure. He has become indispensable to the story the nation tells about itself. The prince who works, the consort who modernizes, the mind that makes progress look elegant. So when his hands tremble slightly as he lifts a letter, When his stomach tightens and he pauses with his eyes closed, he treats it as a private inconvenience. He cannot bear to become a public problem. In the corridors, the new telegraph wires hum with possibility, messages traveling faster than any horse, and the Empire seems to speed up with them. Everything arrives sooner. Everything demands an answer sooner. Albert answers again and again until answering becomes the last habit his body knows. Black. That is the first thing Victoria chooses. Not because anyone tells her to. Not because a committee votes on it. Because it is the only color that matches what she feels when she wakes up and reaches for the place beside her and finds only air. In the first days after Albert's death, the palace becomes a vessel for grief. Rooms that once held the busy hush of planning now hold a different hush. A museum hush, as if the entire building is a gallery of absence. Servants move like shadows. Their hands tremble slightly when they pour tea. Their voices stay low, not out of protocol, but out of instinct, as though loudness might shatter something still fragile. Victoria retreats inward. She writes letters constantly, as if writing can build a bridge across death. Letters to family, letters to ministers with clipped instructions when she must respond. Letters that are not really letters at all, but conversations with the man who is gone. She clings to objects. A piece of clothing. A paper he touched. A book with his notes in the margin. The way grief makes relics out of ordinary things is strange, but it is also ancient. Human beings have always tried to hold the physical world when the emotional world breaks, and Victoria has resources that allow her grief to become architecture. First, Albert's rooms. In Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace, Osborne, Balmoral, his rooms are kept exactly as they were. Not merely preserved as a memorial, but maintained as if he still lives there. Every morning, hot water is brought in for shaving and placed carefully in the basin. Towels are folded. Linens are changed. The fireplace is lit in winter so the rooms remain warm. Clothing hangs in the wardrobe. Papers rest on the desk. It is a ritual of denial and devotion braided together. Imagine being a servant tasked with this. Walking down a corridor with a basin of steaming water. The heat rising into your face. The scent of soap sharp in your nose. Opening a door to a room where the air is still, where no footsteps have crossed the floor in days except your own. Placing the water down as if someone will use it. Backing away quietly, closing the door with care. Day after day, year after year, Victoria insists. At night, she brings one of Albert's dressing gowns to bed. She holds it, presses it close, as if fabric can substitute for a heartbeat. She keeps a plaster cast of his hand on a table nearby so she can reach out in the dark and touch it, letting her fingers trace the shape as if she is still holding him. If you have ever held on to a loved one's clothing because it still carries their scent, you understand the logic. It is not logic of the mind. It is logic of the body. The body is trying to learn a new world and refusing. Victoria withdraws from public life. For years, she rarely appears. She avoids ceremonies. She stops hosting the grand social rituals that make monarchy visible. She continues her official duties when she must, signing documents, meeting ministers, but she becomes less a public queen and more a hidden figure, a widow haunting castles. At first, the public sympathizes. They loved Albert by the end. They can understand grief, but time stretches. 1 year becomes 2. 2 becomes 5. The nation begins to feel the absence. Newspapers start to question. Politicians grow uneasy, not because they do not respect sorrow, but because monarchy depends on visibility. An invisible monarch is a risk. An institution can become irrelevant without noticing it, the way a fire can go out if no one tends it. It is not a violent threat that rises. It is a quieter one. The threat of people asking why they need a crown at all. There is a pamphlet later that captures this mood, asking bluntly what the queen does with the money she receives. The words sting because they are practical, because they are not romantic, because they treat monarchy as an expense that must justify itself. Victoria hears the criticism and feels anger. How dare they demand performance from her, she thinks. How dare they measure her grief against their impatience? They do not understand what she has lost. And she is right. They do not. But the danger is also real. She has children. She has grandchildren. She has a legacy to protect. If monarchy collapses into mockery, everything she and Albert built could crumble. So she makes concessions. Small ones at first. A brief appearance. More portraits distributed. Public monuments that turn private grief into visible stone. This is where her mourning transforms into something enormous. The Albert Memorial rises in Kensington Gardens, tall and ornate, like grief turned into a cathedral. A statue of Albert seated with the Great Exhibition catalog, surrounded by figures that represent continents and arts and sciences. Gold leaf glints against gray London sky. Mosaic in stone and sculpture, layered until it feels almost overwhelming. It is beautiful. It is also heavy. Standing before it, one can feel the argument of it. Look what we lost. Look what he was. Look what I am still carrying. Then there is the Royal Albert Hall, a place dedicated to arts and sciences, opened years after his death. Victoria appears, but cannot speak as planned. The grief rises too quickly. Her voice fails. Her silence becomes its own kind of speech. In those monuments, she finds a socially acceptable outlet for sorrow, and she keeps Albert's memory alive for the nation as well as for herself. Yet the question remains, quiet but persistent. Is this mourning only love? Or is it also guilt? Victoria's letters reveal devotion. Yes, a longing so intense it makes life feel meaningless without him. But they also reveal self-blame. She calls herself unworthy. She replays their last conversations. She wonders if she demanded too much, if she failed to notice his decline, if she relied on him so completely that she helped wear him down. And then there is her rage at Bertie. She blames him for Albert's death. In her grief, she fixes on the timeline and makes it into a cause. Albert went to Cambridge because of Bertie's scandal. Albert returned sicker. Therefore, Bertie killed his father. Medically, it does not fit. Typhoid, if that is what it was, has an incubation period. It could not have been created by a single stressful trip. Some modern experts argue Albert may not have died of typhoid at all, that his symptoms suggest a chronic illness, perhaps something like stomach cancer or another gastrointestinal disease. It is debated, but grief is not a court of evidence. Grief wants a target, and Bertie becomes that target. Imagine being a young man and carrying that blame for decades, living under the shadow of your father's death and your mother's accusation. It is a quiet cruelty, and it shapes their relationship forever. Victoria's mourning becomes the air her family breathes. She wears black for the rest of her life. 40 years. 40 years is long enough for children to become middle-aged, for grandchildren to be born and grow, for the world to change beyond recognition. Horses replaced by early cars. Candlelight replaced by electric glow. Letters replaced by telegrams. Yet Victoria's wardrobe remains a constant darkness. And because she is queen, her habits shape culture. Victorian mourning rituals become more intense, more elaborate. Jet jewelry, strict timetables of black crepe and half mourning, rules about social events, rules about what colors are permissible and when. For many, these rituals provide structure. For Victoria, they become a cage she chooses and cannot leave. Psychologists today might call it prolonged grief. The inability to reach acceptance, the sense that moving forward is betrayal, the constant yearning, the refusal to let time soften the pain. Victoria stops developing emotionally on the night Albert dies. Part of her remains in the blue room forever, holding his hand, feeling the moment the world changed. And still, life continues around her. Her children marry. They have children. Her family spreads outward across Europe, threading through royal houses like roots seeking water. She becomes, in time, the grandmother of Europe. It is a strange legacy. On the surface, it looks like triumph. Connections, alliances, family ties meant to keep peace. But family ties do not guarantee peace. Sometimes they make conflict more tragic. A web can hold a community together. Yes, it can also tangle. And there is another inheritance moving silently through bloodlines. An inheritance Victoria never intended. Hemophilia, a mutation carried on the X chromosome, passed quietly from mother to child. Women can be carriers without symptoms. Sons who inherit it may bleed dangerously from injuries that should be minor. In an age before modern medicine, it can be lethal. One of Victoria's sons, Leopold, suffers and dies young. 2 daughters carry the gene onward. through them, hemophilia reaches other thrones, other families, other futures. In Russia, it reaches the heir, Alexei, and his illness draws his mother into the orbit of a mystic figure, Rasputin, whose influence contributes to scandal and instability. Historians debate the weight of that influence in the larger forces that lead to revolution. The causes are complex, deep-rooted, too large for any single thread. Still, the thread matters. A disease in one child becomes a political vulnerability. A mother's desperation becomes a doorway. A doorway becomes a storm. This is the strange, dark side of legacy. You build with love, and the world uses your building materials for purposes you never imagined. Victoria never intended to seed Europe with both family bonds and a hidden genetic danger. She never intended for her descendants to stand on opposite sides of a war that will kill millions. She never intended for her grief to reshape an era's relationship with death. Yet, intention is not destiny. Sometimes, the universe feels like a vast river, and we are only trying to steer our small boats without knowing the current beneath us. In her later years, Victoria will still hold Albert's memory close, still sleep with the relics of him, still write of longing. And yet, she will also find companionship elsewhere, a reminder that even a heart frozen by grief can still seek warmth. That is a complicated truth, not betrayal, not a replacement, just the stubborn human need for presence. When Victoria finally dies in 1901, she will ask to be buried with Albert's wedding veil, his dressing gown, the cast of his hand. She will also be buried with a photograph and a lock of hair from John Brown, a man who became close to her later. Historians argue about what that relationship meant. We cannot be sure, but we can feel the shape of it. A woman who loved deeply. A woman who lost. A woman who tried to live inside absence and still needed a human voice nearby. And at the end, she will be laid beside Albert in the mausoleum she built, the final act of a love story that became both myth and caution. Breathe slowly now. Listen to the fire. Hear how the room around you is safe, how the darkness is gentle. These stories are heavy, yes, but we are holding them in soft hands. We are letting them dissolve into calm, because the deepest lesson here is not only about crowns and empires and monuments. It is about how love transforms into memory, and memory transforms into legacy, and legacy continues long after we are dust. And in that long, drifting continuation, even grief can become a quiet lullaby, repeating the same name, the same touch, until the mind finally loosens its grip and lets the night carry it toward sleep. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with being watched. Victoria is still the sovereign. Ministers still bow. Yet she feels smaller than she has ever felt, because the one person who spoke to her like a human, not like a symbol, is gone. The country, slowly, begins to interpret her absence in different ways. Some see devotion, Others see neglect. Newspapers begin to speak of the widow of Windsor, a phrase that carries both sympathy and impatience. Victoria resists the pressure at first. Her grief feels more important than politics. But she remembers Albert's insistence on duty, and she begins, reluctantly, to reappear. Not brightly, not often, a figure in black, moving through ceremonies like a living memorial, saying little, sometimes unable to speak at all. The public sees her sorrow and is reminded of their own, and the institution becomes, briefly, a shared mourning. Still, time does not stop. It moves like a river under ice, carrying her children outward into marriages that will braid Britain into Europe, carrying genes and conflicts into the next century. And as that river moves, Victoria's mourning becomes part of the current, shaping the culture of an era and the fate of a family that will one day face storms too large for any one heart to hold. There is a moment, after the first shock of loss has settled into routine, when Victoria begins to sense that her grief is no longer only hers. It has become an atmosphere. It clings to corridors the way cold clings to stone. It settles in drawing rooms like dust that is never fully wiped away. It drifts through family conversations, turning ordinary words into careful ones, as if everyone has learned that the wrong phrase could awaken the Queen's pain like a sleeping animal. Even the sound of footsteps changes. Servants tread more softly. Children learn to pause before entering her presence. Ministers lower their voices, not because the business of government has become less urgent, but because the woman receiving their papers now feels as if she is made of glass. And yet, the empire does not pause. Dispatch boxes arrive. Telegrams bring news in quick bursts of ink and urgency. There are still elections, bills, treaties, distant troubles in places where the sun rises and sets on British flags. The machine continues, the gears turning, the wheels asking for the same thing they always ask for: decision. But Victoria's decisions now feel like they pass through a shadow first, as if every choice must be compared against the memory of Albert's judgment. Sometimes she will pick up a pen, and for a second her mind will reach for him, for the habit of turning her head slightly, asking, "What do you think?" And then she remembers, and the room becomes too quiet. So she does what she can do. She preserves. She maintains. In those years of withdrawal, it is not only the Queen who mourns. The palace itself learns the rhythm. Imagine a corridor at Windsor at dawn. The windows are tall and cold. Pale light slides across framed portraits, across polished floors, across a line of doors that keep secrets behind them. A servant carries a tray and pauses, because there is one door that is treated differently. Albert's door. It opens to rooms kept as they were, day after day, year after year. Hot water is brought in the morning, as if the dead still need it. A fire is laid and lit in winter, as if warmth could persuade time to reverse itself. Towels are folded. Linen is changed. A chair is dusted where no one sits. Victoria uses these rooms as a kind of private chapel. She sits with the silence. She touches objects that still hold his shape, the curve of a pen, the edge of a paper knife, the leather of a book that carries his fingerprints in places too faint to see. Outside those rooms, people argue about budgets and railways and colonies. Inside, the argument is simpler. How do you live after the world you trusted disappears for a long time? Her answer is that she does not really live. She endures. She refuses. She clings. And the public watches, first with sympathy, then with impatience. 1 year becomes 5. 5 becomes 10. Some begin to whisper that the monarchy is dissolving into absence. Newspapers talk about the widow of Windsor as if she is a ghost with a crown. Pamphlets circulate, asking blunt questions about what the nation receives for the money it spends. What does she do with it, people ask? Meaning the allowance, the power, the privileges. It is a cruel question, but it is also a reminder that in a constitutional monarchy, even grief has limits. Victoria hears these murmurs like distant thunder. Part of her is furious, because sorrow is not a performance. Another part of her is frightened, because she understands something Albert always understood. Symbols must be seen to remain symbols. So she makes careful appearances. Not too many, not enough to feel exposed. A carriage ride here, a balcony there, a photograph released so people can remember her face. And always, the black. She begins to pour her grief into stone and institution. In these acts, her mourning becomes public enough to be understood, almost useful, almost acceptable. It becomes a shared story that binds people to the crown again. She builds monuments, yes, but she also builds a myth. Not a lie. Exactly. More like a story with the sharp edges sanded down. A story shaped to carry both her grief and the monarchy's survival. Albert becomes more than a husband. He becomes an emblem of progress, duty, restraint. A figure who can be placed at the center of the national narrative so the public remembers the crown as service, not indulgence. And as she shapes that myth, her children grow into adults who carry its weight. They leave the nursery. They step into uniforms, into marriages, into foreign courts where the air smells different, where languages slip across the tongue with unfamiliar music. They become a kind of living diplomacy, sent out to fasten Britain to the continent. If you were standing beside Victoria in those years, you might notice her gaze lingering on maps. Not the maps of battles or trade routes, but the map of her family. A daughter in Prussia, another in Hesse, sont in naval service. A granddaughter promised to this prince, a grandson sent to that regiment. The web grows, the threads multiply, and the strange, almost tender dream behind it is simple. If we are all related, perhaps we will not destroy each other. It is a beautiful idea. It is also an idea that misunderstands the hunger of nations. Victoria becomes what people later call the grandmother of Europe. At jubilees and ceremonies, her descendants appear like a constellation around her. Kings and queens and crown princes, many of them young, many still soft-faced, with the look of people who have not yet learned what history can demand. They come to London, to Windsor, to Balmoral. They sit for photographs. They exchange gifts. They share meals where the silverware shines and the candles are arranged just so. And there are moments, gentle and almost ordinary, where you can see the family beneath the titles. A grandson laughing at a cousin's joke. Two young men comparing uniforms. A child slipping away from stiff formality to tug at an elder's sleeve. Honestly, I find those small moments the most haunting, because they make what comes later feel sharper. It is easier to accept tragedy when it belongs to strangers. Harder when you can picture the faces at the table. Years pass. The 19th century loosens its grip and slides into the next. Steam becomes common. Telegraph wires stitch distances together. Factories hum. Cities swell. The world grows faster and louder. Victoria remains in black. She grows older, her body shrinking slightly, her posture more rigid, as if grief has hardened into habit. She becomes less a young queen and more an institution, a symbol of endurance, a figure that feels permanent even though nothing human is permanent. And all the while, the web she and Albert wove spreads further. Grandchildren marry into Spain, into Russia, into Scandinavia. Connections crisscross like threads in lace. Names repeat. Faces begin to resemble each other. There are photographs where cousins look like brothers, as if the family has started echoing itself. This is where the story turns darker in a way that is not loud, but inevitable. Because family can bind. It can also tangle. When Europe moves toward war in the early 20th century, the leaders are not only political rivals, they are relatives. King George V of Britain, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia are all first cousins, all grandchildren of Victoria. They grew up with letters and visits, with shared holidays, with nicknames that belong to childhood rather than diplomacy. There are stories of them together, of the way George and Nicholas resembled each other so closely people could be fooled at a glance. There are images of Wilhelm in youth, smiling in a naval uniform, looking, for a moment, like a boy who has not yet hardened. Then the machinery of alliances begins to grind. Treaties pull nations like invisible ropes. Mobilizations start. Plans unfold. Fear rises. Pride stiffens. Leaders feel trapped by expectations and momentum. And in those final days before war, there is a strange, intimate detail. Historians often mention telegrams between Wilhelm and Nicholas. They address each other as Willie and Nicky, childhood names pressed into the formal world of state. For a moment, you can almost hear the desperation inside those lines. Please, stop. Please, and step back. But they cannot, or they will not. The war arrives anyway, vast and industrial and indifferent. It does not care about blood ties. It does not care that a grandmother once hoped family would prevent slaughter. It moves across Europe like a storm that eats everything in its path. Millions die, empires crack, and the crowns that seemed permanent begin to wobble. The Romanovs fall. The German monarchy collapses. Britain survives, but the world it rules shifts and changes, and the cost is everywhere. Victoria does not live to see the full shape of that catastrophe, but her legacy is already braided into it, not as a cause, not in the simple sense. History is too complex for that. Yet her family web is part of the emotional tragedy. It turns geopolitical conflict into something like a family argument that has grown monstrous. And there is another thread in her legacy, quieter and more personal, but no less haunting. The blood, hemophilia, the hidden inheritance. It moves through the family line like a secret river under the surface. It touches Prince Leopold, who suffers and dies young. It passes through daughters who carry it without signs. It appears in distant courts, in boys whose bodies cannot clot blood properly, in families who learn to fear falls and bruises the way others fear fire. In Spain, it will contribute to early deaths after accidents. In Russia, it will become a state secret. Alexei, the heir to the Russian throne, bleeds in ways that terrify his parents. Physicians cannot truly help. Alexandra, desperate and frightened, turns toward anyone who promises relief. And this is where another shadow enters the story. Rasputin, a figure wrapped in rumor, devotion, hatred, scandal. Some accounts claim he eased the boy's suffering. Some historians argue there were natural explanations. Rest, a chance, changes in medication. It is debated how much he truly helped and how much was perception. But perception is powerful. If a mother believes someone can protect her child, that belief becomes a doorway to influence. Rasputin's presence at court becomes a scandal that weakens trust in the monarchy. It feeds whispers of corruption. It sharpens the sense that the rulers are unfit, lost in superstition, while the nation suffers. Again, this is not the only cause of revolution. Not even close. The pressures in Russia are vast war, poverty, inequality, political repression. The machine of history there is heavy and brutal. Still, in a story like this, small threads matter because they show how intimate human pain can ripple outward. A child's illness, a mother's panic, a court's gossip, a public's anger, and eventually, a dynasty's collapse. When you look at it in this quiet, candlelit way, it feels less like a tale of grand strategy and more like a reminder of human fragility. How bodies fail. How love makes us desperate. How power cannot shield anyone from sorrow, even when it comes wrapped in silk and ceremony. Victoria's legacy, then, becomes a mixture of beauty and shadow. She and Albert helped shape traditions, still familiar: the white wedding dress, the Christmas tree, the idea of a family monarchy. They supported museums, education, art, science. They pushed the crown toward a form of service that helped it survive into the modern age. They also passed down complicated family dynamics, political entanglements, and a genetic condition that caused suffering in distant rooms of distant palaces. Legacy is never pure. It is always a blend. In her last years, Victoria grows weaker. She has outlived most of her children. The world around her changes at a speed that would have seemed like magic when she was a girl under the Kensington System. Sometimes she sits near a fire, her hands folded, her jewelry dark, and she seems to drift. Those who see her say she speaks of Albert as if he is still close, as if the decades of mourning have kept him at her side in a way that feels almost physical. And perhaps that is the point. Grief does not always fade. Sometimes it becomes a companion, a shadow that follows you so faithfully you begin to confuse it with love itself. But even in that shadow, the world continues to move, and the story continues toward a winter on the Isle of Wight, toward a bed at Osborne House, toward the final preparations of a queen who never stopped loving, never stopped mourning, and who is about to ask the living to arrange her death as carefully as she arranged her life. So let your breathing stay slow. Let your jaw loosen. Listen to how the fire snaps softly, how the room is warm, how the past can be held without harming you. Because in the next part, we will walk with Victoria into the last quiet hours, where devotion becomes ritual, and ritual becomes the last gentle bridge into the dark. If you were standing with me beside this fireplace, with the candlelight turning the room into a soft pocket of gold, I would tell you that endings are rarely loud. They are often made of small motions: a hand reaching for water, a blanket adjusted, a door closed gently. And in the final days of Queen Victoria, the world feels like it narrows to those motions, as if an entire empire has been folded into a single bedroom. Osborne House, Isle of Wight, a place Albert helped shape, a place meant to be private, almost ordinary, if ordinary could ever exist for them. The sea air moves through the gardens. Salt and damp earth mix with the scent of winter leaves. The sky can be gray and low, the kind of gray that softens edges, making everything look like a drawing. Victoria is 81. She has been queen for more than 63 years. Think of that. A reign longer than most human lifetimes. She has seen the world shift from candlelight to early electricity, from carriage wheels on cobblestone to engines that cough and sputter, from letters that took days to telegrams that arrive like sudden birds. She has outlived Albert by 40 years. 40 years of black fabric, black ribbons, black rituals, as steady as breathing. Now her body is failing, and the family gathers. The night before she dies, there is a kind of hovering stillness in the house. I imagine the corridors at Osborne as if they are holding their breath. Lamps are turned low. Curtains are drawn. Outside, the wind moves through the trees with a thin, whispering sound, and every so often the sea answers, a distant hush that rises and falls. In the bedroom, a clock continues its small work. Tick, tick. A sound so ordinary, it becomes strange when everything else feels sacred. Someone adjusts a shawl over her shoulders. Someone moistens her lips. Someone offers water, and the glass touches the edge of her mouth with a faint clink. Tiny sounds. The kind of sounds that become enormous when a family is listening for the last breath. And there are pauses where she seems to listen, too, as if the room contains a second conversation no one else can hear. If you were there, you might notice how people look at her hands. They are smaller now, thinner, yet they are the same hands that signed papers, that opened letters, that once trembled with youthful certainty as she asked Albert to marry her. Late in those hours, when voices fall away, grief behaves in its own quiet way. Not dramatic, not sharp. More like a tide that keeps returning. A granddaughter might step into the hallway and press her forehead against the cool wall, just for a second, because the body needs somewhere to put the feeling. A son might stare into a fireplace that is barely lit, watching embers glow and fade, as if he can learn how to accept loss by studying fire. Then, after the last breath, there is a moment when no one moves. Not because they are commanded to be still, but because the mind cannot quite accept that the room has changed. The world looks the same. The bed is the same. The curtains are the same. Yet something essential is missing. Only later does the practical work begin. Doctors confirm. Servants begin to prepare. Messages are sent. A whole nation, still capable of awe, begins to process that an era has ended. The funeral becomes a journey as much as a ceremony. There are routes, trains, ships, guards lining platforms, crowds gathering in cold air, their breath visible, their faces solemn. Many people do not know Victoria as a person. Not really. They know her as a long presence, an image in newspapers, a figure who has been there since their grandparents were young. When that presence is gone, it creates a hollow feeling, as if time itself has shifted. And through all that movement, there is a private center to the ritual, the coffin, and inside it, the objects that matter more to her than crowns. The veil, the dressing gown, the cast hand, the hidden photograph, the lock of hair. It is as if she is packing for a journey and taking with her the only things she trusts to keep her from being alone. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Rooms fill with soft footsteps, with murmured conversations that keep stopping when she stirs. There is a particular tension in such gatherings, a mixture of love and anticipation and fear, because everyone knows that time is running out, but no one wants to say it plainly. Kaiser Wilhelm II comes, her eldest grandson, restless and intense. Bertie is there too, now King Edward VII, the son she blamed for so long, the son who still carries that old wound, the son who holds her hand as her breath grows shallow. If you listen closely, you can hear the strangeness of it. The past does not vanish. It sits in the room like another person. Victoria has prepared for this moment the way she prepared for everything, with instructions. Years earlier, she wrote down what should happen after her death, down to the smallest detail, as if controlling the rituals could soften the fear of what comes next. There is comfort in planning, even when the plan is for leaving. She wants to wear her wedding veil, the one from February 10th, Ichembabai Sisir. That thin fabric becomes a bridge back to the day she walked toward Albert, nervous and bright, when the world still felt full of possibilities. She wants Albert's dressing gown placed beside her in the coffin, the same garment she held in bed for decades, the same fabric that carried his scent, that became her private tether. She wants the plaster cast of his hand included too, so even in death she can, in some symbolic way, keep holding him. When I picture that cast, I think of how cold plaster feels compared to skin. Yet the mind can make warmth out of anything, if it wants it badly enough. But there are other items, too. Hidden ones. A photograph, a lock of hair, placed beneath flowers so most eyes will never see. John Brown, the Scottish servant who became her companion after Albert's death. Historians still argue about what their relationship was. Romantic, purely loyal, something in between. We cannot be sure. We only know that Victoria wanted him close in death as well. That detail does not weaken her love story with Albert. To me, it makes her more human, because grief does not erase the need for companionship. It does not flatten the heart into a single emotion forever. Even a person in black, even a queen who kept rooms lit for a dead husband, can still seek a living voice nearby when the nights are long. In those final days, Victoria drifts in and out. Sometimes she speaks. Sometimes she simply stares toward the window as if listening to the sea. Her breath becomes slower, and there is a tenderness in that slowness, as if the body is preparing itself to let go. On January 22nd, Ichen Jobalingi, she dies. The hour is early evening. The room is filled with people who love her and people who fear what comes after. When she slips away, it is not like the dramatic scenes in novels. It is more like a candle guttering. The flame leans, trembles, and then is gone. Her last word, people say, is birdie. If that is true, it is a strange kind of mercy. The son she punished with blame is the name she calls at the end, the name that leaves her lips as if a door is closing, gently, on a long conflict. After she dies, the rituals begin. The queen's body is prepared. The palace becomes quiet again, but it is a different quiet now, the quiet after an era ends. There are processions, guards, formalities that have been practiced for centuries. Yet beneath all the ceremony is the simple truth that a woman has died, and her family feels it like a bruise. Her funeral is held at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, and then she is taken to Frogmore, to the mausoleum she built for Albert, the place where his body is weighted beside an empty space for 40 years. And now she comes to fill that space. The image is haunting. Two coffins side by side. The story that began with a teenage girl admiring a boy's smile ends with an old woman in black finally reaching the stillness she chased for decades. Victoria and Albert together again. Some people find comfort in that. Others find sorrow. Because it is not only romantic devotion, it is also a reminder of how grief can freeze a life, how a person can spend 40 years living inside absence and still never feel ready to step out. And yet, she did survive. That matters too. She did not stop being queen entirely. She continued, even when she did not want to, even when the work felt meaningless without Albert. She signed papers. She met ministers. She watched her children and grandchildren grow. She witnessed changes that would have stunned her younger self. She endured. There is a particular darkness in endurance, but there is also a quiet strength in it. And her story, like Albert's, becomes larger than either of them could have imagined. Their descendants spread across Europe. Their names appear in history books as emperors, kings, queens. Their family ties fail to prevent war, but those ties make the tragedy more intimate, more bitter, more human. Their genetic inheritance causes suffering in hidden rooms where nurses move softly and mothers pray in the dark. Their institutions persist. Museums, halls, traditions, a way of imagining monarchy as family, as service, as something that must be justified. That legacy is complicated, and maybe that is the deepest truth of this whole tale. Love can change everything. Yes, it can make a girl brave enough to propose to her own future husband, breaking tradition with a trembling voice. It can make a man sacrifice his independence and accept a life in his wife's shadow, not because he is weak, but because he chooses partnership over pride. It can make two desks sit side by side, papers spread between them, building an empire's decisions out of quiet conversation. But love can also pull too hard. It can demand too much. It can turn grief into a shrine that becomes a prison. Victoria's mourning preserved Albert's memory. It kept his contributions alive. It shaped culture. It built monuments that still stand. It also held her in darkness for 40 years, a long time to carry a wound without letting it scar over. If you are listening tonight, and part of you recognizes that pattern, the way the mind holds onto pain because it feels like loyalty, I want you to hear this softly. You can remember without drowning. You can love without freezing. You can carry someone in your heart and still allow your own life to breathe. Victoria could not fully do that, and perhaps her era did not offer the tools or language to help her. That is part of the tragedy. It is also part of the human story. Because the past is not something we escape. It is something we learn to hold gently, the way you might hold a fragile object near a flame without letting it burn. So, as we let this story settle, I want you to return to your own room. Your own body is your own present. Feel the weight of the blanket. Feel the rhythm of your breath. Notice the way your jaw can soften, the way your shoulders can loosen, the way the night outside can exist without demanding anything from you. The candles in our imagined room are still burning, steady and calm. The fire has become quieter now, mostly embers, glowing like small red eyes that mean no harm. Dust drifts in the air where light meets shadow. Somewhere, far away, a river breathes in the dark, a sound you can almost imagine even if you cannot hear it. And in that hush, the lives of Victoria and Albert become what all lives become eventually: a story, a set of echoes, a lesson carried forward in the softest possible hands. At Frogmore, the air is different from Osborne. It is quieter in a way that feels permanent. Stone holds cold even when the day is mild. The trees stand like witnesses, their branches still, their shadows long. Inside the mausoleum, the light is dim, softened as if it has passed through cloth. Flowers scent the space, sweet at first, then faint, then replaced by the clean, mineral smell of stone. This is where Albert has waited. This is where Victoria demanded the world be arranged so absence would have a place to live. There is something tender and unsettling about mausoleums. They are built to defy forgetting, yet they are also built to admit the truth that bodies do not return. A monument is a promise and an acceptance at the same time. When Victoria is laid beside Albert, I imagine a kind of hush that is not only human, a hush that belongs to time itself. Water continues to move somewhere outside, unseen. Perhaps a small stream, perhaps rain sliding down leaves. Dust continues to settle, invisible, patient. The world does what it always does, even when a queen is placed into stillness. If you take anything from them, let it be: this power does not protect us from loss, and loss does not erase love. Love changes shape. It becomes memory. It becomes habit. It becomes legacy. Sometimes beautiful, sometimes heavy, always human. And now, with the tale complete, you do not need to carry it any further tonight. Let it drift away like smoke. Let it fade like candlelight when you close your eyes. Let the dark be gentle. Good night.